Ever wonder what happens when a bartender inherits a billionaire's dark secrets? In the gritty streets of Atlanta, Maya Torres trades her apron for a fortune and a fight. A mysterious marriage, a deadly conspiracy, and two vengeful sons hunting her down. Will she rebuild a broken legacy or burn in the neon rain? Hit that subscribe button, drop a comment with where you're watching from, and dive into this thrilling saga. Secrets unravel next. Rain slammed against the cracked pavement of Atlanta's South Side, a relentless drumbeat that drowned out the hum of the city. The Neon Dive bar squatted at the edge of a crumbling strip mall, its tin roof rattling under the downpour, green and red lights flickering through the haze like a dying pulse. Inside, the air was thick with the sour tang of spilled beer and the low growl of a rap track pumping through busted speakers. Maya Torres stood behind the counter, her curly black hair plastered to her neck from the damp, her deep brown eyes scanning the room with a weary sharpness. Her hands moved fast, pouring a shot of cheap whiskey for a trucker with grease-stained fingers, wiping a rag over the sticky wood, tossing a lime wedge into a margarita for a biker who'd already had too many. The clock above the jukebox read 1:47 a.m., and her shift was dragging like a bad dream. She tugged at the collar of her faded black t-shirt, the fabric clinging to her skin from the humidity that seeped through the bar's warped walls. Her Converse sneakers, once white, now a muddy gray, squelched faintly against the floor, the soles worn thin from 3 years of pacing this dive. The crowd was the usual mix. Loudmouths shouting over each other, a couple of mechanics nursing beers in the corner, a guy in a stained hoodie slumped over the pool table like he'd forgotten how to stand. Leo, her co-worker, darted past with a tray of empties, his dark curls bouncing as he yelled, "Maya, you got table 6? They're bitching about the tequila again." "Let him bitch," she muttered, sliding a glass across the counter to a regular who didn't bother with thanks. Her voice was hoarse, scraped raw from shouting orders over the noise all night. She didn't mind the chaos. It paid the rent, or at least some of it, but the weight of it all pressed down harder every day. Rent was 3 months late, Diego's school fees were overdue again, and the landlord's latest note had been taped to her door in red ink. "Pay by Friday or you're out." 2 days left. She rubbed her temples, the ache behind her eyes pulsing in time with the bass. The door banged open, letting in a gust of wet wind and a figure she didn't clock at first. Another drunk, probably. She kept her head down, slicing a lime with a knife that'd seen better days, until a shadow fell across the bar. She looked up, and there he was, Jack Carver, the old man in the silver gray suit, same as every night for 2 years. 10 p.m. sharp, he'd claim his spot at the far end of the counter, order a bourbon neat, and sit there like he owned the place. Tonight was no different, except the rain had soaked his cuffs, and his salt and pepper hair was slicked back tighter than usual. He slid onto the stool, pale blue eyes locking onto her with that quiet intensity she'd never gotten used to. "Bourbon," he said, voice low and gravelly, like he'd smoked one too many cigars. She nodded, grabbing the bottle from the shelf, pouring it smooth and steady into a chipped glass. He didn't talk much, never had, but when he did, it stuck with her. "Last week," he'd said, "this one is better than the last, Maya. What is your secret?" She smirked and shot back, "Not spilling it all over you, Jack." He chuckled, a rare break in his stone face, and left her at 20. Tonight, though, he just watched her, fingers tapping the counter like he was counting something she couldn't see. She turned away, busying herself with a stack of dirty glasses, but she felt his gaze on her back. It wasn't creepy, not like the leers she got from the bikers or the truckers who thought a $5 tip bought them a smile. It was deliberate, like he was sizing her up for something she didn't know about yet. She shook it off, tossing a rag over her shoulder and heading to the cooler for a beer. The night dragged on, the rain a steady roar outside, until the last call came at 2:30. The bar emptied out slow staggering steps and slurred goodbyes, and she locked up with Leo, the neon sign buzzing faintly as they flipped it off. Outside, the air was heavy, the rain a cold slap against her face as she pulled her leather jacket tight. The lot was a mess of puddles and oil slicks, reflecting the green glow of the bar's sign in jagged streaks. She waved Leo off. He lived 2 blocks over and started the trek home, her sneakers splashing through the wet. The south side was quiet at this hour, just the hiss of tires on the highway and the occasional bark of a stray dog. Her apartment was a mile away, a squat 3-story dump with peeling paint and a fire escape that creaked like it might give out any second. She kept her head down, hands stuffed in her pockets, the weight of the night settling into her bones. Then she heard it, a scream, sharp and panicked, cutting through the rain. She froze, head snapping toward the sound. It came from an alley up ahead, shadowed and narrow, the kind of place you didn't go looking for trouble. But the scream came again, higher this time, and she caught the edge of a child's voice. Her gut twisted. She could keep walking, pretend she hadn't heard, get home to Diego, and collapse on the couch. But her feet moved before her brain caught up, pulling her toward the alley. She rounded the corner and saw them, 3 guys, hoods up, circling a kid who couldn't have been more than 10. A girl, skinny and soaked, her braids plastered to her face as she clutched a torn backpack. One of the guys, a tall bastard with a scar across his cheek, had her pinned against the wall, his fist raised. The others laughed, a low, ugly sound that made Maya's blood boil. She didn't think. She just acted. "Hey!" she shouted, voice cracking through the rain. They turned, startled, and she dug into her pocket, yanking out the pepper spray she carried for nights like this. The tall one sneered, stepping toward her. "Mind your business, bitch." She didn't She sprayed him square in the face, a hiss of mist that sent him staggering back, howling. The second guy lunged, but she swung her bag heavy with a water bottle and keys and caught him in the jaw. He stumbled, cursing, and she grabbed a broken beer bottle from the gutter, holding it up like a blade. "Back off," she snarled, her heart hammering so loud she could barely hear the rain. The third guy hesitated, hands up, then bolted when the tall one started coughing and spitting. "You're dead, you hear me?" he choked out, but they were already running, disappearing into the dark. Maya dropped the bottle, chest heaving, and turned to the girl. She was shaking, eyes wide, but alive. "You okay?" Maya asked, kneeling despite the wet soaking through her jeans. The girl nodded, clutching her bag tighter. "Where is home?" A trembling finger pointed down the street. Maya walked her there 2 blocks, a sagging duplex with a light flickering in the window. The girl mumbled a thank you and slipped inside, the door clicking shut. Maya stood there a minute, rain dripping off her nose, adrenaline still buzzing in her veins. She didn't see the black sedan parked across the street, its tinted windows hiding Jack Carver's pale eyes as he watched her trudge back into the storm. The walk home was a blur, her soaked jacket heavy on her shoulders, the cold seeping into her bones. She climbed the stairs to 2B, the familiar stench of mildew hitting her as she pushed the door open. The apartment was a cramped wreck, sagging couch, chipped counter, a fridge that hummed like it was dying. Diego was asleep on the floor, curled up under a blanket, his notebook open to a half-finished map of some impossible city. She smiled faintly, kicking off her shoes and grabbing a tortilla from the counter. The skillet hissed as she heated it, the smell of cumin and charred peppers filling the room, a small comfort after the mess of the night. She plated the taco, set it aside for Diego's breakfast, and sank onto the couch, staring at the ceiling. The landlord's note glared at her from the table, red ink like a wound. She thought of the girl in the alley, the way her hands had shaken, and something fierce burned in her chest. She didn't have much, but she'd fight for what she could keep. Her eyes drifted shut, the rain a dull roar outside, and she didn't know that Jack Carver had already marked her as the one he'd been looking for. The next night at Neon Dive felt heavier, like the rain had soaked into the walls and stayed there. Maya tied her apron with quick, practiced knots, her fingers still tingling from the cold she hadn't shaken off. The bar was alive again, truckers hollering over the jukebox, a couple of bikers arguing about a busted carburetor, the air thick with smoke and sweat. Leo darted past, balancing a tray of beers, his grin sharp as he called, "Maya, you're late. Boss is gonna skin you alive." She rolled her eyes, grabbing a bottle of Jack Daniels from the shelf. "He'll live. I'm here, aren't I?" She barely slept, the couch lumpy under her back, Diego's soft snores keeping her half awake. The alley fight replayed in her head, Scarface's sneer, the girl's terrified eyes, the weight of the bottle in her hand. She checked the news on her cracked phone screen that morning, half expecting a story about it, but there was nothing. Just another night in Atlanta nobody cared about. She shook it off, pouring a double for a guy with a beard like steel wool, her hand steady despite the ache in her knuckles. The clock hit 10 p.m., and the door swung open right on cue. Jack Carver stepped in, rain dripping off his silver gray suit, his cane tapping the floor as he crossed to his spot. The crowd parted without noticing, like he carried some invisible weight they couldn't touch. Maya watched him settle onto the stool, his gaunt frame hunched slightly, those pale blue eyes finding her like they always did. "Bourbon," he said, same as ever, and she slid the glass over without a word. He took a slow sip, the ice clinking softly, and leaned back, fingers drumming a rhythm she couldn't place. She turned to mix a margarita for a woman in a leather vest, but Jack's voice cut through the noise. "Rough night last night, huh?" She froze, lime juice dripping onto her fingers, then glanced over her shoulder. His face was unreadable, but there was something in his tone knowing, almost amused. "What is that supposed to mean?" she asked, keeping her voice flat. He shrugged, swirling his drink. "Just a guess. You look like you've been through it." Her jaw tightened. Did he know? No way he couldn't have seen her in that alley. She'd been alone, or so she thought. She wiped her hands on her apron, stepping closer. "I handle it. Always do." He nodded, a faint crack of a smile tugging his lips. "Yeah, I've noticed." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a slim black card, and slid it across the counter. "Meet me tomorrow, 7 p.m., Ritz downtown. I've got something to talk about." Not a joke. She picked it up, the gold lettering catching the neon glow. Jack Carver, Carver Realty. No number, just an address. She frowned, flipping it over blank. "What you proposing or something, old man?" she said, half laughing, expecting him to brush it off. But he didn't. He stood, dropping a 50 on the counter, his eyes steady on hers. "Not a proposal. An opportunity. You need cash, I need help. Think it over." He turned and walked out, cane tapping, the door swinging shut behind him. She stared at the card, the weight of it strange in her hand. Leo sidled up, wiping a glass. "What's with old Bourbon? He hitting on you now?" She stuffed the card in her pocket, shaking her head. "Nah. Just weird." But it wasn't just weird. It stuck with her, gnawing at the edges of her thoughts as she finished the shift. Jack had been coming here 2 years, same time, same drink, same quiet watchfulness. She remembered the first time he'd shown up, ordering bourbon while she fumbled a shaker, spilling gin all over the counter. He'd said, "You'll get the hang of it," and left her at 20. Over time, he'd dropped little comments, "Rough crowd tonight, huh?" Or you're quick with that knife, Maya, and she'd fire back with sarcasm, figuring he was just another lonely rich guy slumming it. But now, replaying those nights, she saw it different. He'd been studying her, clocking every move, the way she handled drunks, the way she smiled through the bullshit, the way she never quit even when her feet bled through her shoes. She locked up at 3 a.m., the rain lighter now, a drizzle that misted her face as she walked home. The card burned in her pocket, and she couldn't shake his words. You need cash, I need help. Diego's school bill sat on her counter, $2,000 overdue, a warning letter threatening to kick him out. Rent was $900 she didn't have. She'd do anything for Diego, but this? Whatever Jack was offering, it smelled like trouble. Back at the apartment, she kicked the door shut, the lock sticking like always. Diego was awake, perched at the rickety table, pencil scratching over his notebook. His dark hair fell into his eyes, his skinny frame hunched like a bird over a map of spiraling towers and rivers that looped in impossible curves. Hey, D, she said, dropping her keys with a clatter. He didn't look up, just kept drawing, lips moving silently as he counted streets or bridges or whatever he saw in his head. She smiled, grabbing a carton of orange juice from the fridge, half empty, stretched thin. She poured him a glass and slid it over. Eat yet? He shook his head once, voice soft. No. She heated a tortilla, the sizzle a small rebellion against the quiet. Jack's card sat on the counter now, staring at her as she diced a bruised tomato and sprinkled it with salt. An opportunity. She didn't trust it, but she couldn't ignore it either. Diego took a bite of the taco she set in front of him, still drawing, and she leaned against the counter, sipping juice straight from the carton. The rain tapped the window, a steady drip that matched the questions in her head. What did Jack Carver want with her? And why did she feel like saying yes? The Ritz-Carlton loomed over downtown Atlanta like a glass giant, its lights cutting through the muggy haze of the evening. Maya pulled her beat-up Honda Civic into a side lot, the engine coughing as she killed it. The attendant, a kid in a stiff uniform, gave her a look, his eyes flicking from her soaked Converse to the duct tape on her driver's window. She ignored him, tugging her leather jacket tighter as she stepped into the rain, the drizzle cold against her neck. The lobby hit her like a slap, polished marble floors, a chandelier dripping crystals, the air cool and sharp with the scent of money. Her sneakers squeaked, leaving faint wet trails, and the concierge in his crisp suit raised an eyebrow, but didn't stop her. She headed for the elevators, Jack's card crumpled in her fist. The penthouse floor opened to a hushed hallway, all plush carpet and gold walls that swallowed sound. She found room 2801 and knocked, the rap of her knuckles barely audible. The door swung open fast, and Jack stood there, tall and lean, his silver suit pristine despite the faint wheeze in his breath. He held a bourbon, ice clinking as he stepped aside. Come in, Maya. I wasn't sure you'd show. She crossed her arms, staying put. Yeah, well, I wasn't either. What is this about, Jack? He gestured to a leather sofa inside, its black surface gleaming under recessed lights. Sit. We'll talk. She hesitated, then stepped in, the door clicking shut like a trap. The penthouse was a world-apart floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city's sprawl, furniture sharp and modern, a bar cart stacked with bottles she'd never touch at. Neon dive. It smelled of wood polish, and something expensive she couldn't name. Jack sat across from her in an armchair, swirling his drink, his blue eyes steady. Want one? He asked, nodding at the bourbon. I'm good, she said, perching on the sofa's edge, her damp jeans sticking to the leather. Just tell me why I'm here. He took a slow sip, then set the glass down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. I'm dying, Maya. Lung cancer, stage 4. Docs give me weeks, maybe a month if I'm lucky. Her stomach dropped, but she kept her face blank. Sorry to hear that. Still don't see what it's got to do with me. He didn't blink. I need a wife. Not for love, not for company, just on paper. A legal deal. I'll pay off your debts, cover Diego's school, give you $1 million when I'm gone. All you do is sign the certificate. She laughed, a sharp bark that echoed in the quiet room. You're kidding, right? What is this, some dying man fantasy? He slid a folder across the coffee table, his hand steady despite the faint tremble in his fingers. She flipped at open contracts, bank statements, a number with too many zeros. Her laughter died, throat dry. Why me? She asked, voice low, almost a whisper. He leaned back, eyes narrowing like he was peeling her apart. I know you plenty. 2 years at that bar, I've watched you. You're tough, street tough, the kind that doesn't break. I saw you last night, in that alley. 3 punks beating on a kid, and you didn't hesitate. Pepper spray, a busted bottle, you sent him running. Saved that girl without a second thought. Her breath caught, the memory flashing hot Scarface's howl, the rain in her eyes. You were there? Parked across the street, he said, tapping the armrest. Saw the whole thing. You've got fire, Maya. Guts. I need that. She stood, pacing the room, her sneakers silent on the thick carpet. This is nuts. People don't marry strangers for money. He didn't flinch. They do when they're desperate. And I know you are. Rent's late, Diego's school's on your back. You're drowning. I'm throwing you a rope. She whirled on him, hands clenched. And what's in it for you? Some last hurrah before the grave? He coughed, a wet rasp that made her wince, then met her gaze. I've got 2 sons, Ethan and Caleb. They hate me, and they want my money. $500 million in real estate, and they're circling like vultures. I need someone outside their reach to take it when I'm gone, keep it from them. Her jaw tightened. They're that bad? Worse, he said, voice hard. They've got their mother's blood in Eleanor. I screwed her over, left her dying, while I chased some fling. She cursed me till her last breath, and they've carried it since. They burned this city down for a dime. She sank back onto the sofa, rubbing her temples. Why not cops? Lawyers? Someone who knows how to fight this. He snorted. Cops here are dirty, half on my payroll, half on someone else's. No proof, no case. You're my move, Maya. A wild card they won coming. She stared at him, heart pounding under her ribs. This is insane. I'm a bartender, Jack, not some savior. You're more than that, he said, voice softening. I've seen it. You fight when it counts. I need you to finish what I started. She stood again, pacing to the window, the city sparkling below towers of glass and light, a world she'd never belonged to. Finish what? He looked out, eyes distant. I built Carver Realty on broken lives, took homes, turned M into condos for rich bastards. I want it fixed. Use my money to undo some of that damage. That is the deal. She shook her head, incredulous. You're dumping your guilt on me? I've got my own mess. He shot back, and I'm cleaning it up. Debt's gone, Diego's set, a fresh start. Say yes. Silence stretched, thick and heavy. She thought of Diego, his maps, the eviction notice, the endless shifts. Then Jack, those nights he'd watched her, knowing more than he'd let on. If I do this, she said finally, you swear Diego is safe. No blowback on him. I swear, he said, standing to meet her gaze. And I'll show you how to handle them. You're not alone. She nodded, slow and deliberate. All right. I'm in. But if this goes south, Jack, I'm haunting you. He cracked a rare smile, lifting his glass. Deal? Welcome to the family, Maya. She didn't smile back. The folder sat there, a contract waiting. She grabbed the pen, her hand steady despite the tremor in her chest. One signature, and her life changed. But as the ink dried, she felt it a war she wasn't ready for, looming just out of sight. The courthouse smelled of stale coffee and dust, a gray slab of a building tucked between Atlanta's gleaming towers and the Southside's crumbling edges. Maya Torres stood in front of a clerk who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, his tie crooked and his eyes glazed over a stack of papers. She borrowed a white button-up from Leo's closet too big, the cuff swallowing her wrists, and paired it with her usual jeans, the hems frayed from dragging through too many puddles. Her damp Converse squeaked against the linoleum, a sharp contrast to Jack Carver beside her, his silver-gray suit crisp despite the faint rasp in his breath. He leaned on his cane, the tap of it steady as the notary stamped their marriage certificate with a thud that echoed in the quiet room. No flowers, no rings, no vows, just a signature scrawled in black ink, hers shaky, his precise. 10 minutes later, she was Mrs. Carver, a title that felt like a borrowed skin she hadn't grown into. "Congratulations," Jack said as they stepped outside, his voice dry as the late afternoon sun cut through the haze. He handed her a keyring, a single fob dangling from it, sleek and black like something out of a sci-fi movie. "Penthouse is yours now. Move in whenever." She took it, the metal cold against her palm, her fingers brushing as briefly his skin clammy, thinner than it should have been. "This doesn't feel real," she said, staring at the fob like it might bite. He coughed into a handkerchief, a wet, rattling sound, then tucked it away. "It's real enough. Get your stuff. I'll send a car tomorrow." She nodded, still half dazed, and watched him climb into a black SUV that peeled away from the curb, tires hissing on the wet asphalt. The air was thick with humidity, the rain from last night lingering in puddles that reflected the courthouse as squat silhouette. She stuffed the keys in her jacket pocket, the weight of them pulling at the leather, and headed for her Civic parked crooked in the lot. The engine sputtered twice before catching, and she drove back to the south side, the city blurring past strip malls with flickering signs, gas stations hawking $2 coffee, billboards shouting about cheap lawyers and cheaper dreams. Her hands gripped the wheel tight, knuckles pale, Jack's words looping in her head. "You're my move, Maya." A wild card. She didn't know what that meant yet, but it scared her more than she'd admit. The apartment building loomed ahead, a 3-story relic with chipped paint and a fire escape that groaned in the wind. She climbed the stairs to 2B, the familiar stink of mildew and cigarette smoke hitting her as she pushed the door open. Inside, it was a mess of survival, sagging couch patched with a faded blanket, a small TV flickering static in the corner, a kitchen counter shoved against the wall with a single burner stove and a fridge that buzzed too loud. Diego was at the rickety table, pencil scratching over his notebook, his dark hair falling into his eyes, as he drew a city of spiraling bridges and rivers that twisted like veins. He didn't look up, lost in his world, and she dropped her keys with a clatter, the sound sharp in the quiet. "Hey, Dee," she said, shrugging off her jacket. "We're moving tomorrow. Somewhere better." He paused, pencil hovering, then nodded once, his voice soft and clipped. "Okay." She smiled faintly, crossing to the fridge for a carton of orange juice almost gone, just a slosh at the bottom. She poured it into a chipped glass and slid it to him, watching him sip it slow, his eyes still glued to the page. "You eat yet?" Another shake of his head. "No." She grabbed a tortilla from a plastic bag, the skillet hissing as it heated, the smell of cumin and charred peppers filling the room. It was her mom's recipe, Maya Torres, who cooked tacos on a stove just like this, her rough hands warm when she ruffled Maya's hair and said, "You're gonna make these better than me one day, Mija." 6 years since the heart attack took her, and the memory still stung. She plated the taco, set it in front of Diego, and leaned against the counter, sipping the last drops of juice straight from the carton. Her phone buzzed. Leo texting, "You covering tonight? Boss is pissed you bailed early yesterday." She groaned, thumbs hovering over the screen. Last night, after the Allie and Jack's card, she declocked out early, claiming a headache. Truth was, her head was spinning with too much to process. She typed back, "Yeah, I'll be there. Chill." The landlord's note glared from the table, red ink like a threat, but Jack's deal flickered in her mind. Debt's gone, Diego's school paid. She didn't trust it, but she couldn't walk away. Morning came gray and damp, the rain a faint tap against the window. Maya packed their lives into a duffel bag and 2 cardboard boxes: clothes, Diego's notebooks, a skillet, a jar of salsa half empty. The apartment looked sadder, stripped bare, the couch as stains glaring, the fridge as hum louder without their clutter to muffle it. Diego sat cross-legged on the floor, sketching a map of impossible towers, oblivious to the chaos. She told him it was a fresh start, and he nodded, trusting her like always. A horn blared outside. Jack's driver, a wiry guy named Tony with a buzz cut and a scowl that didn't budge. He leaned against the SUV, chewing gum, watching her haul the boxes down the stairs without offering a hand. Diego trailed behind, clutching his notebook, his sneakers scuffing the concrete. She loaded the trunk, arms aching, and slid into the back seat beside Diego. Tony glanced at her in the rearview, his voice a flat drawl. "Penthouse, huh? Big step up from this dump." She shot back, "Mind your business," and he smirked, pulling onto the street. The drive downtown was a blur: honking horns, neon signs fading into glass towers, the Southside-esque grid giving way to the city's shine. The Penthouse sat on Peachtree Street, its lobby all marble and mirrors, the air cool with the scent of polished wood. Tony dropped them at the elevator, muttering about parking, and Maya punched the button for the 28th floor. Diego pressed against the glass wall, watching Atlanta shrink below, his breath fogging the pain in quick, shallow puffs. The doors slid open to Jack's world, a sprawling space of black leather and chrome, walls of glass framing the skyline like a painting. The living room was dark. A sectional sofa too clean to have been used, a flat screen mounted above an untouched fireplace, a bar cart gleaming with bottles of top-shelf liquor. The kitchen was a chef's dream: stainless steel appliances, a granite island, a fridge big enough to hide in, but it felt cold, like a stage nobody bothered to play on. Jack emerged from a hallway, his steps slow, cane tapping the hardwood. "Welcome," he rasped, his voice thinner than last night. "Your room is down there, Diego's too." "Mine's upstairs. I like my space." She nodded, gripping her duffel, the straps cutting into her palm. "Thanks. This is a lot." He coughed, steadying himself against the wall, his suit hanging looser on his frame. "You'll get used to it. Ruby, I'll show you around. She runs the place." Ruby appeared like she'd been waiting, a middle-aged black woman with a warm smile and an apron tied over her jeans. Her graying hair was pulled into a tight bun, and she smelled faintly of cinnamon, like she'd been baking something sweet. "Hey, sugar," she said, pulling Maya into a hug that caught her off guard, her arms strong and soft at once. "You must be the new Mrs. Carver. And this little man?" She nodded at Diego, who stared at his shoes, notebook clutched tight. "My brother, Diego," Maya said, stepping back from the embrace. "He is quiet." Ruby winked, her voice a smooth drawl. "Ain't nothing wrong with quiet. Come on, I'll give why all the tour." The penthouse unfolded like a maze: 2 bedrooms down the hall, each with king beds and walk-in closets bigger than their old apartment combined. A bathroom with a tub deep enough to drown in, A study lined with leather-bound books Jack probably hadn't cracked in years. Ruby pointed out the rest. Laundry tucked behind a sliding door, a rooftop deck with a view that made Maya's head spin, a gym she'd never touch. Diego wandered to his room, already sketching on the bed, his pencil a soft scratch against the silence, while Maya trailed Ruby to the kitchen. Ruby poured sweet tea from a pitcher, the ice clinking as she handed Maya a glass. Jack is a good man deep down. Rough edges, but he means well. Maya sipped, the sugary bite sharp on her tongue. He is dying. That's what he told me. Ruby's smile faded, her hand stilling on the counter. Yeah. Been fighting it a while. Docs say it's the lungs, too many cigars, too much stress. He don't talk about it though. Maya leaned on the island, the granite cool under her elbows. What is his deal? 2 years at the bar, and I barely know him. Ruby chuckled, wiping her hands on her apron. He is a builder, real estate king. Made millions tearing down old places, putting up shiny ones. But it cost him. Lost his girl years back, Rosa. Sweet thing, Cuban, sang like an angel. He don't say it, but she asks why he is doing this. Maya frowned, swirling the tea. Doing what? Ruby shrugged, her eyes soft. Fixing things, I reckon. You're part of that now. The words hung heavy, and Maya set the glass down, the fob in her pocket a cold reminder of the deal she'd signed. She didn't know what Jack expected her to fix, but she felt the edges of it closing and a promise she hadn't asked for, a life she didn't fit. The penthouse settled into a strange rhythm over the next week, its sleek surfaces and glass walls a cage Maya couldn't quite escape. She woke early each morning, the city's neon pulse dimming into dawn beyond the windows, and cooked breakfast on the fancy stove, tacos with eggs and salsa, the sizzle a small rebellion against the sterile space. Diego adjusted fast, claiming a corner of his room for his maps, the walls soon plastered with pencil-drawn cities that spiraled into impossible shapes. Jack kept his distance, mostly holed up upstairs, but he'd join them for dinner some nights, sitting at the head of a long glass table that felt too formal for 3 people. He ate little, picking at her food with a fork, his hand shaky, his breath a faint wheeze. One evening, she tried something new, tacos al pastor, pineapple charred on the grill, the sweet sharp smell filling the kitchen. She carried a plate upstairs to Jack's office, a room of dark wood and scattered papers, where he sat hunched over a desk, a bourbon glass sweating beside him. He took the plate, fork trembling as he speared a bite, chewing slow. Good, he rasped, voice rougher than usual. Too bad I can't taste much anymore. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Chemo? He shook his head, pushing the plate away. Something like that. You're a hell of a cook, Maya. Ever think about doing it for real? She shrugged, brushing a curl from her face. Dreamed of a food truck. Tacos, salsa, the works. Mom's recipes. He leaned back, eyes sharp despite the fatigue carving lines into his face. Make it happen. Money is there now. Her voice tightened. Yeah. Your money. He didn't argue, just sipped his bourbon and stared out the window, the city's light streaking across his gaunt features. Silence stretched, thick with unspoken weight, until he coughed a wet, hacking sound that made her wince and set the glass down hard. I wasn't always like this, he said, almost to himself. Used to be a kid in Georgia dirt, parents scraping by on a farm. They cooked cornbread, collards, stuff that stuck to your ribs. I didn't learn. Too busy chasing dollars. She stepped closer, the hardwood cool under her socks. Worth it? He didn't answer right away, just pulled a thin chain from under his shirt, a silver necklace, with a small cross pendant, worn smooth from years of touch. Rosa S., he said, holding it out, the metal glinting in the dim light. Found it in a box last year. She'd like you. Maya took it, the warmth of his skin lingering on the chain as she slipped it into her pocket. I'm not her, Jack. He nodded, a faint smile tugging his lips. No. You're tougher. That's why you're here. She frowned, the necklace heavy against her hip. You keep saying that. Why me really? He leaned forward, elbows on the desk, his voice low and steady. I told you saw you in that alley, fighting for a kid you didn't know. But it's more. You don't quit. 2 years at that bar, I watched you take the hits, drunk spills, life, and keep going. I need that fire. She crossed her arms tighter, the room as shadows pooling around her. For what? Your sons? His eyes darkened, a flicker of something raw breaking through his calm. Ethan and Caleb. They hate me, got every right to. Their mother, Eleanor, she was dying, cancer eating her up, and I left her. Ran off with some girl half my age, thought it'd fix me. Eleanor cursed me till her last breath, and those boys carry it like a torch. They want my money, yeah, but it's personal too. Maya's stomach twisted, the weight of his words sinking in. They'd kill you for it? He snorted, a weak laugh turning into a cough. Maybe. They've tried little things, swapped my meds once, thought I wouldn't notice. No proof though. That's why you're here, to keep it out of their hands. She stared at him, the man falling apart in front of her, and felt a chill she couldn't shake. And when they come for me? He met her gaze, unflinching. You fight. You're tougher than they think. He tapped the desk, a sharp rap. Keep that necklace. She'd want you to have it. She left him there, the plate barely touched, and walked back downstairs, the chain a cold lump in her pocket. Ruby was in the kitchen, kneading dough for cornbread, the air thick with flour and warmth. She glanced up, her smile fading as she caught Maya's face. You okay, sugar? Maya sank onto a stool, rubbing her temples. He's worse today. Told me about his wife Eleanor. Left her dying for some fling. Ruby's hand stilled, flour dusting the counter. Yeah. Broke her, broke them boys too. Ethan was old enough to remember 15, maybe. Caleb was just a kid, but he felt it. Jack has been running from that ghost ever since. Maya pulled the necklace out, letting it dangle from her fingers, the cross catching the light. Gave me this. Said it was Rosa's. Ruby's eyes softened. His other regret? Rosa was his heart, sang like an angel, danced like the world was hers. He tore her home down for a parking lot, lost her too. You're carrying a lot of his past now, sugar. Maya tucked the chain away, her throat tight. I didn't sign up for this. Ruby reached over, squeezing her hand. You did though. And you're strong enough to hold it. That night, Maya couldn't sleep, the penthouse too quiet, the city's hum a distant pulse through the glass. She sat on the rooftop deck, the air muggy and still, Jack's necklace in her hand. His coughs echoed faintly from upstairs, a reminder of how little time he had left. Ethan and Caleb loomed in her mind, sons, who hated him, who'd hate her too. She'd fought in that alley for a stranger, but this was a war she didn't know how to win. The cross glinted under the neon glow, and she gripped it tight, the edges biting into her palm. Jack saw fire in her, but all she felt was the weight. The penthouse's gleam dulled under a storm 2 weeks later, rain hammering the windows like it wanted in. Maya was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of salsa chipotle and lime, the heat sharp enough to wake her up when the elevator dinged. She froze, spoon dripping onto the granite, the sound cutting through the quiet like a gunshot. Heavy footsteps echoed, and 2 men stepped into the living room like they owned it. Ethan Carver was first 40-ish, blonde hair slicked back, his white suit screaming money, his eyes cold and hard as steel. Caleb followed, younger, darker, his leather jacket tight over a wiry frame, a cigarette dangling from his lips, ash flicking onto the hardwood. Behind them loomed Vince, a hulking shadow with a shaved head and a scar slicing his eyebrow, fists like bricks at his sides. Ethan scanned the room, his voice smooth but venomous. "So this is Dad's new toy. Not bad for a barmaid." Caleb laughed, kicking a chair aside with a thud that made Maya flinch. "What do he pay you, huh? Hope it was worth it, 'cause you're in over your head." She set the spoon down slow, wiping her hands on her jeans, her heart hammering but her face a blank mask. "I don't want your money. Get out." Ethan stepped closer, looming over her, his cologne sharp and expensive. "Cute. But you don't call shots here. That estate's ours, 500 mil, and you're not touching a dime." Vince cracked his knuckles, a low growl rumbling in his throat. "She don't listen good, boss." Caleb flicked his cigarette onto the counter, the ember sizzling out in a drop of salsa. "He left Mom to rot while he screwed around. Now you think you're family? You're nothing." Maya's jaw tightened, Jack's story flashing hot, Eleanor dying, him running, these two carrying the hate. She stepped up, nose an inch from Caleb's, her voice low and steady. "I know what he did. Doesn't he mean I'm handing you shit?" Ethan smirked, adjusting his cufflinks with a flick. "We've got ways cops who owe us, judges who bend. You're out of your league." She held his gaze, the salsa's heat still stinging her fingers. "Then why were you here? If it's so easy, why not let the courts handle it?" Caleb sneered, leaning in, his breath sour with smoke. "'Cause we don't wait. Give us what's ours, or your little brother might not make it home tomorrow." Rage flared, a white-hot spike in her chest, and she shoved him back hard. "Touch Diego, and I'll bury you." Before Caleb could swing, Jack's cane tapped down the stairs, sharp and deliberate. He stood at the landing, frail but commanding, his suit hanging loose on a shrinking frame. "Enough," he snapped, voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Get the hell out of my house." Caleb turned, sneering. "You're half dead already, old man. This skank's not saving you." Jack's eyes narrowed, a flicker of steel breaking through the exhaustion. "She's my wife. Legal and binding. You're done here." Ethan smirked, stepping back with a lazy grace. "We'll see about that. Enjoy your little game while it lasts." He nodded at Vince, who shot Maya a glare that promised blood, then followed them to the elevator. The doors shut, swallowing their shadows, and Maya sank against the counter, breath ragged, hand shaking. Ruby burst in from the hall, a frying pan raised like a club, her bun lopsided from the rush. "You okay, sugar?" Maya nodded, clutching the counter's edge. "No. But I will be." Jack slumped into a chair, breathless, his cane clattering to the floor. She turned to him, voice sharp. "They're not bluffing, are they?" He shook his head, wiping sweat from his brow with a trembling hand. "No. They've been after me for months, tried slipping something in my meds, bugging my phones. They'll kill us both if they can." She crossed her arms, the salsa cooling on the stove behind her. "Then why drag me into this?" He pulled a USB drive from his pocket, small and black, and slid it across the table. "This? Proof they've been buying land illegally, squatters' homes, poor folks' lots for a casino scam. Feds will bury them if it gets out. You hold it when I'm gone." She stared at the drive, its plastic scratched and dull, a bomb waiting to blow. "And when they come for it?" He met her eyes, voice hard despite the rasp. "You fight. Or you run. Your call." She picked it up, the weight of it sinking into her palm, and shoved it into her pocket beside Rosa's necklace. The room spun, the rain a relentless drum outside, and she felt the shadows closing in Ethan's cold smirk, Caleb's burning hate, Vince's fists. Jack coughed again, A wet hack that echoed, and she knew he wouldn't last much longer. She'd signed up for this, but now it was real, and there was no turning back. Chapter 7. The Last Letter. The penthouse was a fortress of glass and silence the next night, the storm easing into a drizzle that streaked the windows. Maya sat in the living room, flipping through a cookbook she'd found in Jack's study, some chef's take on southern food, all glossy photos and recipes she'd never try. The USB sat heavy in her pocket, a secret she hadn't dared to touch since Ethan and Caleb's visit. Diego was in his room, sketching under the soft glow of a lamp, and Ruby had gone to bed, leaving the place eerily still. Jack hadn't come down all day, his coughs faint through the ceiling, and she couldn't shake the feeling he was slipping away. A crash shattered the quiet glass breaking upstairs, followed by a weak rasp. Maya. She dropped the book, heart-lurching, and bolted for the stairs, taking them two at a time. She found him in his office, slumped over the desk, a shattered bourbon glass on the floor, amber liquid pooling with shards. Papers were scattered, contracts, maps, old photos, and his cane lay tipped against the chair. His face was ashen, sweat beading on his forehead, but his eyes burned with a desperate urgency. "Get over here," he croaked, waving her closer with a trembling hand. She knelt beside him, hands hovering, unsure where to touch. "What happened? You okay?" He snapped, "No," then softened, his voice breaking. "But that's not the point. Look!" He shoved a photo across the desk, a young woman with dark curls and a radiant smile, standing in front of clapboard houses, the edges worn soft from years of handling. "Rosa. Before I fucked it all up." Maya picked it up, her fingers brushing the faded ink. "She's beautiful." He nodded, a tear cutting through the sweat on his cheek. "Yeah. Those houses her block, I raised him for a mall that went bust. She hated me for it. Rightly so." She set the photo down, meeting his gaze, her throat tight. "Why tell me now?" He gripped her wrist, his strength fading, but his eyes fierce. "Because I'm out of time. That USB, don't just use it on Ethan and Caleb. Use it to rebuild what I took. Promise me." Her breath hitched, the weight of his words crushing. "I promise." He let go, slumping back, breath ragged. "Good. There's a letter drawer left side. Read it when I'm gone. Not before." She started to argue Jack, but he cut her off, voice sharp. "Get Ruby. Now." She ran downstairs, yelling for Ruby, who dropped her book and hurried up, her slippers slapping the hardwood. They got Jack to his bed, a massive four-poster that dwarfed his shrinking frame, and Ruby tucked a blanket around him, murmuring soft prayers Maya couldn't hear. He waved them off, eyes fluttering shut. "Leave me. I'm fine." They didn't believe him, but they stepped out, closing the door. Maya leaned against the wall, the photo of Rosa vivid in her mind, her hand shaking. "He is not making it through the night, is he?" Ruby shook her head, tears brimming. "No, sugar. He is ready to go." Hours later, the penthouse was a tomb, the city's hum a faint pulse. Maya sat in the kitchen, staring at Rosa's necklace, its cross glinting under the pendant light. Diego slept, Ruby rested, and the clock ticked past midnight. She couldn't shake the dread Jack was fading, and she was ready. A faint thud came from upstairs, soft but final. She bolted up, stairs blurring under her feet, and pushed into his room. He lay still, eyes closed, chest unmoving. The bourbon glass on his nightstand was tipped over, a faint chemical tang cutting through the whiskey poison, maybe, though she couldn't be sure. Beside it sat an envelope, her name scrawled in his shaky hand. She sank onto the bed, hands trembling as she tore it open. The letter was short, each word a punch. "Maya, I'm sorry for dragging you in. Cancer got me, no poison, just time. Ethan and Caleb didn't kill me, though they wanted to. The USB-S your weapon, use it to stop their casino scam. But more, use the money. Rebuild what I broke, Rosa's neighborhood, the south side, all of it. You got the fire I lost. Don't let it die. Jack. Tears blurred the ink, and she wiped them away, furious and gutted. She grabbed the glass, sniffing it sharp off, but maybe just her imagination. He said no poison, but doubt nodded her. She set it down, careful not to smudge prints, and clutched the letter to her chest. Jack, she whispered, voice cracking. You son of a bitch. Why me? He didn't answer, his face peaceful in a way she'd never seen. She sat there, the city's neon spilling through the blinds, until Ruby's soft knock pulled her back. Maya started, but Ruby nodded, stepping in to touch his hand. I know, sugar. I know. Morning broke harsh and gray, rain tapping the glass like it mourned with her. Ruby called the coroner, who ruled it natural cancer, no autopsy needed. Maya didn't argue, but she kept the glass, wrapped in a towel and stashed in her room. The lawyer, Hargrove, arrived by noon, a slick man in a pinstripe suit, reading the will in a monotone. Everything went to Maya. Penthouse, accounts, Carver Realty $500 million, minus what Ethan and Caleb would claw for. She sat through it numb, Diego beside her, sketching silently. When Hargrove left, she pulled Ruby aside. They'll all come for me now, won't they? Ruby's jaw tightened. Yeah. But you've got that drive Jack gave you. Use it. Maya nodded, the letter S weight sinking into her bones. Jack was gone, but his war was over, and she was the one left holding the pieces. Rain streaked the penthouse windows in relentless sheets, turning Atlanta's skyline into a smudged watercolor of neon and gray. Maya Torres stood in the living room, Jack's letter crumpled in her fist, its edges worn from the dozen times she'd unfolded and refolded since his death 3 days ago. The place felt hollow without him. His cane still leaned against the armchair. A half-empty bourbon bottle sat on the bar cart, its amber glow catching the light like a ghost of his presence. Diego was in his room, sketching maps with a focus that shut out the world, while Ruby hummed softly in the kitchen, baking cornbread like it could stitch the silence back together. But Maya knew nothing would. Jack was gone, and the war he'd warned her about was crashing down like the storm outside. The lawyer, Hargrove, had called that morning, his voice slick and clipped through the phone as static. Ethan and Caleb are contesting the will. Fraud, they're saying, claim you conned a dying man. They've got a buckhead shark, some hotshot named Kessler, tearing through the paperwork. Court date S in 2 weeks. Maya had gripped the counter, her knuckles white, as he rattled off the details. $500 million in real estate, accounts, Carver Realty, all hers unless they ripped it away. She didn't care about the money, it was a number too big to feel real, but Jack's words burned in her chest. Rebuild what I broke. That meant keeping it out of their hands, no matter what. She pulled the USB from her sock drawer, its scratched black plastic cold against her fingers. Jack had said it held proof Ethan and Caleb as dirty deals, illegal land grabs for a casino that degut the south side. She hadn't looked yet, too raw to face whatever he'd left her, but the rain drumming on the glass pushed her over the edge. She grabbed Ruby's laptop from the study, a sleek thing that whirred to life with a hum, and plugged the drive in, her breath catching as the screen prompted for a password. She tried Jack, nothing. Carver, nope. Then on a hunch, Rosa. The file spilled open, a cascade of folders, and names she didn't recognize at first. She clicked one labeled EC0325, and Ethan's voice crackled through the speakers, smooth and cold as ice. Tell the doc to swap the meds, placebo's fine. Just keep him breathing till we close the deal. Caleb's laugh cut in, sharp and jagged. Yeah, and if he croaks early, Pin it on that bartender bitch. Her stomach twisted, while rising as she paused it, the timestamp glowing 3 months ago. Another file, Land Contracts 04, showed scanned deeds parcels bought for pennies from evicted families. Zoned for a casino that'd rake in millions while the Southside starved. Emails between Ethan and a guy named Vince detailed payoffs to city officials, forged signatures, threats to squatters who wouldn't leave. But nothing about poison, nothing about killing Jack outright, just greed, raw and ugly. She yanked the USB out, heart pounding so hard it hurt, and shoved it back into her pocket. This was just leverage. It was a loaded gun, and pointing it at Ethan and Caleb would paint a target on her back bigger than the one she already had. Jack's letter said they didn't kill him, cancer did, but the glass she'd stashed, wrapped in a towel under her bed, nagged at her. That chemical tang, sharp under the whiskey, had she imagined it. She needed answers, and she needed a plan fast. The phone buzzed. Hargrove again. They're pushing for an injunction tomorrow. Freeze the assets till the hearing. You got anything to fight this? She swallowed, voice steady despite the shake in her hands. Yeah. I'll call you back. She paced the living room, the city's neon streaking across the hardwood, her sneakers silent against the polish. Diego's pencil scratched faintly down the hall, a lifeline to something normal, but her mind spun Ethan's smirk, Caleb's cigarette, Vince's fists. They'd come for her that night, threatened Diego, and she'd pushed back, but this was bigger. Legal now, not just fists in the dark. She grabbed her jacket, the leather still damp from last night's rain, and headed for the kitchen. Ruby looked up from her dough, flour dusting her apron, her warm eyes narrowing. Where you off to, sugar? It's pouring out there. Neon dive, Maya said, tying her hair back with a quick twist. Need to think. Tell Diego I'll be late. Ruby's hand stilled, a frown creasing her face. You watch yourself. Those boys ain't playing. Maya nodded, the USB and necklace a twin weight in her pocket, and slipped out to the elevator. The drive downtown was a blur, wipers slapping, horns blaring, the Civic's engine coughing like it might give up. She parked in the bar's lot, gravel crunching under her tires, the neon sign buzzing faint and familiar. Inside, the air hit her like a wall, stale beer sweat, the low thump of a rap track she'd heard 100 times. Leo was behind the counter, polishing glasses with a rag older than him, his dark curls bouncing as he grinned. There she is. Thought you ditched us for good, Mrs. Millionaire? She tossed her jacket on a stool, tying her apron with a jerk. Yeah, well, rent's not the problem anymore. Everything else is. He slid her a glass of water, raising an eyebrow. That Carver mess? You're in deep, huh? She took a sip, grimacing at the flat taste. Deeper than you know. His sons are coming for it all, court, threats, the works. Leo leaned on the counter, his Puerto Rican accent thickening. They the ones who offed him? She froze, the glass halfway to her lips, then set it down hard. He said no cancer got him. But I don't know. Found a glass, smelled weird. And this, she pulled the USB out, holding it up like a confession. Proof they're scum. Land scams, bribes. Enough to bury them. Leo whistled low, snatching it from her fingers to turn it over. Chica, this is dynamite. You gonna use it? She snatched it back, shoving it deep in her pocket. If I have to. But they'll kill me for it or Diego. The bar filled up, slow truckers, bikers, the usual crowd, and she moved on autopilot, pouring drafts, shaking cocktails, wiping spills. The noise drowned her thoughts, but the USB burned against her hip, Jack's voice echoing, use it to stop them. She didn't want their war, but it was hers now, and running was an option. The clock hit 10 p.m., and she half expected Jack to walk in, cane tapping, bourbon odor on his lips. Instead, the door stayed shut, and the empty stool at the counter stared back like a wound. Leo caught her zoning out, snapping his fingers. "Hey, you good? You're pouring whiskey like it's water." She blinked, the bottle in her hand dripping onto the counter, and cursed under her breath. "Yeah, just thinking." He smirked, dodging a drunk waving an empty glass. "Think faster, then. I ain't covering your ass all night." She forced a grin, but it faded as she wiped the spill, her mind racing. The injunction tomorrow, the USB, Diego too many pieces, and she didn't know how they fit. She needed to see those files again, needed to know what she was holding, but not here, not now. The shift ended at 2 a.m., the bar emptying into the rain-soaked night. She locked up with Leo, the neon sign flickering off, and drove back to the penthouse, the city a smear of lights through the windshield. Upstairs, Diego slept, his latest map taped to the wall, towers and rivers in pencil, a world she couldn't touch. Ruby left a plate of cornbread on the counter, a note scrawled beside it, "Eat sugar. You're too skinny." Maya smiled faintly, breaking off a piece, the buttery warmth a small comfort. She pulled the laptop out again, plugged in the USB, and dug deeper, hours ticking by, files unfolding like a map of Ethan and Caleb's sins. No murder, no poison, just greed so thick it choked. Jack was right, they hadn't killed him. But they'd kill her if she didn't move first. The penthouse was too quiet the next afternoon, the rain a steady tap that matched the knot in Maya's chest. She dropped Diego at school that morning, his squat building with its faded paint and chain-link fence a stark contrast to the glass towers downtown. He shuffled off with his backpack slung over one shoulder, his latest map clutched tight, and she watched him go, a pang of guilt twisting her gut. She spent the night with the USB, copying files to a cloud drive Leo had set up over a 3 a.m. call. "Back it up, chica. They can't steal the sky," he said, voice groggy but steady. She emailed Hargrove key files with a note, "Hold this. If I go down, release it." Then she crashed on the couch, the USB tucked into her bra, Rosa's necklace dangling beside it, a twin weight against her skin. She was in the kitchen, stirring coffee on the stove, the bitter smell cutting through the haze, when her phone buzzed an unknown number. She frowned, swiping it open, and the text hit her like a punch, "USB for the kid. Warehouse on MLK midnight." Her breath stopped, the mug slipping from her hand and shattering on the tile, brown liquid pooling with the shards. Diego. They had Diego. Panic clawed her, a feral thing clawing up her throat, but she shoved it down, hands shaking as she dialed Leo. "They've got him," she said, voice hard despite the crack. "I need you." He didn't hesitate, his usual grin gone even through the line. "I'm there." "What is the play?" "Trap," she said, grabbing her jacket, the leather cold and damp. "But we flip it." She hung up, her mind racing. Warehouse on Martin Luther King Drive. A rotting shell she'd passed 100 times, rusted beams and broken windows. She needed a decoy, something to buy time. She rummaged through her duffel, finding an old USB from a bar promo, same brand, scratched up, close enough. She loaded it with junk files, recipes, random photos, her hands steady now, fury burning out the fear. They met at Neon Dive. After closing, the bar dark and quiet, the neon sign off, just a faint hum in the air. Leo brought a burner phone, his face tight as he handed her the fake USB. "They won't know till it's too late," he said, no trace of his usual laugh. She nodded, slipping the real one deeper into her bra, the necklace as cross biting her skin. "You circle the perimeter, call 911 when it's time. I go in alone." He started to argue. "Maya, you can't," but she cut him off sharp. "I can. For Diego I can." The drive to MLK was a blur, rain slashing the windshield, the Civic S wipers barely keeping up. The warehouse loomed ahead, a hulking skeleton against the storm, its broken windows gaping like eyes. She parked a block away, gravel crunching under her tires, and stepped out, the fake USB in her pocket, her soaked Converse squishing with every step. The air was thick with damp rot, the rain a cold sting on her face as she pushed through a rusted door, the hinges screaming into the dark. Inside, the space was cavernous, dripping beams, puddles pooling on cracked concrete, shadows stretching long and thin. Ethan and Caleb waited in the center, Diego tied to a chair between them, his eyes wide but silent, his backpack torn at his feet. Vince loomed behind, a knife glinting in his meaty hand, the scar on his brow a jagged slash under the dim light filtering through the roof. Ethan stepped forward, his white suit pristine despite the filth, his smirk cold. "Smart girl showing up? Where's out the drive?" She pulled a fake from her pocket, holding it up, her voice steady. "Here's your trade. Let him go." Ethan caught it as she tossed it, turning it over with a flick of his fingers, his eyes narrowing. "This better be real." Caleb smirked, flicking ash from a cigarette, the ember glowing red. "If it ain't, your kid is done." She cut Diego's ropes with a quick slash of a shard she'd picked up, her hand steady as she pulled him close, his breath fast against her shoulder. "It's real. Now get out." Ethan nodded at Vince, who raised the knife, a slow grin splitting his face. "Loose ends, why no?" She didn't flinch, her arm tight around Diego. "Check your phone, Ethan. Hargrove's got the real files sent an hour ago. You touch us, it's over." Ethan's smirk faltered, his hand dipping into his pocket, pulling out his phone. A notification blinked, Hargrove's email, subject, insurance. He cursed, loud and sharp, shoving the fake USB into his jacket. "You're dead anyway, bitch." Sirens wailed outside, red and blue flashing through the broken windows. Leo's call, right on time. Vince bolted, his boots pounding the concrete, Caleb scrambling after, but Ethan lingered, his glare a promise. "This isn't the end." She met his eyes, Diego trembling beside her. "It is for you." The cops stormed in, guns drawn, shouting orders as Ethan raised his hands, his suit soaked now, his smirk gone. She held Diego tight, rain dripping off them both, the fake USB had discarded lie on the floor. They sat in the back of a cop car, a blanket around Diego's shoulders, his map clutched in his lap. He didn't speak, just leaned into her, his breath slowing. She stroked his hair, the real USB still against her chest, Rosa's cross a cold anchor. The warehouse shrank in the rear view as they drove away, Ethan and Caleb cuffed in another car, Vince long gone into the night. She flipped their trap, but the war was over not yet. Morning broke cold and clear, the rain finally gone, leaving Atlanta's streets slick and gleaming under a weak sun. Maya sat in the penthouse kitchen, the granite island scattered with coffee stains and crumbs from Ruby's cornbread, Diego asleep upstairs, his map taped to his new wall. She barely slept, the USB and necklace still tucked against her skin, Jack's letter open beside her, its ink smudged from her fingers. The cops had taken Ethan and Caleb downtown, the fake USB confiscated as evidence, but she'd kept the real one close, her weapon, her shield. She called Hargrove at dawn, her voice raw. "They're locked up. Diego's safe." "What now?" He clicked his tongue, papers rustling through the line. "Feds are interested, land fraud, bribery, maybe attempted kidnapping. That drive's gold if it's legit. You got the glass too?" She glanced at the towel-wrapped bourbon glass under her bed, its faint chemical tang haunting her. "Yeah. Test it." He grunted. "Will do." Kessler is still pushing the fraud angle, but this could sink him. Sit tight. She hung up, pulling the laptop close, and plugged in the USB again, digging through the files with a focus she hadn't had before. Hours passed, the city waking beyond the glass cars honking, birds cutting through the quiet. The evidence was damning: contracts, recordings, emails, but no smoking gun for murder. Ethan's voice about the meds, Caleb's laugh about pinning it on her, all pointed to dragging Jack's death out, not ending it fast. She cross-checked dates with the glass timeline: Jack's last night, the chemical smell. Dowd nodded, but the files backed his letter. Cancer got me, no poison. The coroner's report came by noon, Hargrove emailing it with a note. Natural causes confirmed. Lung cancer advanced. No toxins in system. Glass had bleach residue, likely cleaning. She stared at the screen, relief crashing into guilt. They hadn't killed him, not directly. Jack was right, they wanted him alive long enough to secure their scam, not dead in a hurry. She sank back, the chair creaking, and rubbed her face, the weight of it all pressing down. That afternoon, she drove to the station, Diego in the passenger seat, silent but steady, his pencil tapping his knee. The cops let her see Ethan and Caleb's separate cells, gray walls, orange jumpsuits. Ethan sat stiff, his blonde hair mussed, his eyes cold, as he glared through the bars. You think you won? Kessler LL shred you. She leaned close, voice low. You're done. Feds have the files, casino scam, payoffs, all of it. But I'm not keeping everything. His smirk faltered. What? Half the estate, she said, the words heavy but sure. Jack's money, $250 million. It's yours if you help me fix what he broke. Ethan laughed, sharp and bitter. You're insane. I'd rather rot. She nodded, stepping back. Your call. Caleb was next, slouched against the wall, his dark hair falling into his eyes, cigarette gone. He looked up, quieter, his smirk faded. Why? She crossed her arms. The USB's weight a reminder. Jack screwed your mom, Eleanor, I get it. He screwed me too, dragging me in. But I lost my mom young, worked my ass off for Diego. I turned that into something. You can too. His jaw tightened, a flicker of something, pain, maybe, crossing his face. He left her dying. For some slut. She nodded, soft. Yeah. And he hated himself for it. Said so in his last letter. I'm giving you a shot to make it right, not for him, for you. Ethan shouted from down the hall, she's bluffing. Caleb. Don't buy it. But Caleb stared at her, his fingers flexing. Half? She nodded. Half. And you work with me rebuild the South Side? Rosa's neighborhood. Jack's mess. He snorted, but it lacked heat. You're crazy. She shrugged. Maybe? Think it over. She left them there, Ethan's curses fading, Caleb's silence louder. Back at the penthouse, she sat with Ruby, the kitchen warm with cinnamon and coffee. They didn't kill him, she said, the glass on the table unwrapped now. Ruby sighed, relief softening her face. Good. He deserved to go his way. Maya nodded, the USB beside the letter, her plan forming half for them, half for Jack's promise. She'd fight Kessler, use the files, but she'd offer peace too. Ethan might burn, but Caleb, she saw a crack there, a chance. Days blurred into a week, the penthouse a fortress of glass and tension as the legal storm brewed. Maya met Hargrove downtown, a sterile office with fluorescent lights and stale coffee, handing over the USB and glass for the feds. They've got enough, he said, flipping through files on his desk. Casino as dead, land as seized, arrests pending on their contacts. Kessler as flailing. She nodded, her jacket tight across her shoulders. And the will? He smirked. Ethan S. out too dirty. Caleb S. a maybe if he takes your deal. Court S. next week. She sold the penthouse that afternoon, the cash pouring into a trust she controlled. 500 million split clean, half locked for Ethan and Caleb if they deep bend. She didn't want the glass towers. The ghosts just jackass mission. Ruby moved to a Southside duplex, promising to visit, her cornbread recipe in Maya's hands. Diego stayed close, his maps sprawling, his quiet a bomb as she planned Rosa's haven, a community center in an old factory Jack had owned. Brick walls she'd paint bright. She visited Caleb again, the jail stark and cold, his jumpsuit wrinkled now. He stood as she approached, hands in pockets, his eyes wary. "You serious?" "Half?" She nodded, sliding a contract through the bar's legal binding. $250 million and a job. Help me build gardens, classrooms, kitchens. For Rosa, for Eleanor. He took it, fingers tracing the ink, his voice low. Mom loved flowers. Roses mostly. He bulldozed her garden for a condo. Maya swallowed, Rosa's necklace heavy in her pocket. Then plant him again. With Diego's maps he's good, you'll see. Caleb's lips twitched, almost a smile. Ethan'll hate this. She shrugged. Ethan's lost? You don't have to be. He stared at the paper, then nodded slow. All right. I'm in. She exhaled, relief sharp and sudden. Good. See you when you're out? Back home, a rented Southside flat now. Small, but hers. She cooked tacos, the skillet hissing, Diego sketching at the table. Leo called, his voice bright. Heard you snagged one of him. Badass chica. She grinned, flipping a tortilla. Yeah. One down, one to go. Night fell, the city pulsing beyond the window, and she sat with Diego, the USB gone, the necklace on the counter beside Jack's letter. Caleb's yes was a stark reconciliation, fragile but real. Ethan loomed, a shadow still, but she'd deface him when he came. For now, she ate, the salsa sharp, the promise alive. The Southside air was thick with the scent of wet earth and grilling meat as summer crept into Atlanta, the rain replaced by a sticky heat that clung to everything. Maya Torres stood in the skeleton of what had once been Jack Carver's factory, an abandoned sprawl of brick and rust on the edge of the city's poorest stretch, now gutted and reborn as Rosa's haven. 6 months had passed since she'd sold the penthouse, since Caleb's grudging nod in that jail cell, and the trust's money. 250 million of Jack's fortune had poured into this place like water into cracked soil. The other half sat locked, waiting for Ethan's defiance to break or burn out, but she didn't wait for him. She built. The factory's bones stood firm, red brick walls scrubbed clean, windows replaced with wide panes that let in the sun, a roof patched and painted a defiant yellow. Inside, it was alive. Classrooms with mismatched desks where kids like Diego scribbled math or drew wild cities. A gym with a hoop Leo had bolted up himself. A kitchen where Maya's stove hissed with the sizzle of tacos and tamales. Outside, a garden took shape. Diego's maps turned real. Winding paths and flower beds Caleb had dug with a quiet focus she hadn't expected. Roses bloomed red and fierce along the fence, a nod to Eleanor, their thorns catching the light. Opening day had been chaos, kids shouting, parents milling, a ribbon Maya cut with a pair of scissors Ruby handed her, her warm laugh cutting through the noise. You did it, sugar, Ruby had said, pulling her into a hug that smelled of cinnamon and pride. Maya had grinned, sweat beading on her neck, and watched Diego lead a group of boys to the garden, pointing out the curves he'd sketched months ago. Caleb lingered at the edge, his leather jacket swapped for a faded t-shirt, dirt under his nails as he adjusted a sprinkler. He didn't smile, not yet, but his hands moved with purpose, and that was enough. Now, weeks later, the center hummed with routine. Maya stood in the kitchen, her apron streaked with salsa, stirring a pot of chili that bubbled thick and dark. The air was sharp with lime and cumin, her mom's recipes reborn in a space that felt like hers. Kids darted past the open door, their sneakers slapping the tile, one yelling, "Miss Maya, when's lunch?" She shouted back, "10 minutes, keep your shirt on," and grinned as their laughter echoed down the hall. Leo poked his head in, his curls damp from coaching basketball outside, a whistle dangling from his neck. "Smells like heaven, chica. You feeding the whole block again?" "Gotta," she said, tossing him a tortilla she'd just flipped. "They keep coming." He caught it, taking a bite, his grin wide. "Good thing you quit the dive. This beats pouring whiskey for drunks." She nodded, the memory of neon dive fading 3 years behind that counter, now traded for this chaos she could shape. Leo had quit too, signing on to coach, his laugh filling the gym as he taught kids moves he'd learned on cracked courts growing up. Caleb appeared at the back door, wiping sweat from his brow, a spade slung over his shoulder. "Roses are set," he said, voice low, his dark eyes flicking to the pot. "Smells better than prison chow." She smirked, ladling chili into a bowl and sliding it over. "Eat. You're too skinny." He took it, leaning against the wall, and ate slow, the spoon clinking soft against the ceramic. They didn't talk much, he wasn't the type, but the silence was easier now, less jagged. He'd been out 2 months, parole strict but manageable, and he'd shown up here every day, digging, planting, building. Ethan was still locked up, fighting Kessler's losing battle, but Caleb had stayed, and that shift felt like a crack letting light in. Diego shuffled in, his notebook under his arm, pencil tapping his leg. "Garden's full," he said, soft and clipped, his eyes on the floor. "Too many kids." Maya ruffled his hair, he flinched but let her, and handed him a bowl. "Good problem to have, D. Your maps did that." He nodded, sitting at the counter, and ate while sketching, his pencil tracing new paths she'd build someday. Caleb watched him, a faint tilt to his mouth. "Kid's a genius." "Weird, but genius." She laughed, sharp and real. "Takes one to know one." Night fell slow, the sitter emptying out, the last kids trailing home with parents or alone, their voices fading into the hum of crickets and distant traffic. Maya locked the kitchen, the stove cooling, and stepped outside, the air warm against her skin. The garden glowed under string lights. Caleb had strung up roses, marigolds, a patch of herbs she used for salsa. She sat on a bench Diego had designed, its curves uneven but solid, and pulled Rosa's necklace from her pocket, the cross catching the light. Jack, as promised, lived here, rebuilt homes, not torn down, a haven from the wreckage he'd left. She didn't miss the penthouse, its cold glass and ghosts. This was hers, messy and real. Caleb joined her, unasked, his boots scuffing the dirt as he sat, hands in his pockets. "You think he'd care?" he said, nodding at the necklace. She turned it over, the metal warm now. "Jack?" "Yeah." He'd grumble, but he'd care. Caleb snorted, staring at the roses. "Mom would be like this." Hated him, but she'd like it. Maya nodded, soft. "Good. That is the point." They sat there, the city pulsing beyond the fence, a truce settling between them, two people Jack had broken, piecing something back together. Fall crept in with a bite, the southside trees dropping leaves that crunched underfoot, the air sharp with smoke from food trucks parked 2 blocks over. Rosa's haven stood strong, its brick walls weathered but bright, the garden a riot of color even as the roses faded. Maya leaned against the kitchen counter, her apron dusted with flour, rolling dough for tamales, corn masa sticking to her fingers, the rhythm a steady pulse against the chaos outside. The center had grown too fast, maybe kids spilling into every corner, parents asking for more classes, the gym packed with Leo's pickup games. She cooked for them all, Her mom's recipes stretched to feed dozens. The dream of a food truck replaced by this bigger, wilder thing. Diego was in the garden, clipboard in hand, counting plants with a focus that shut out the world 16 and sharp-edged, his maps now blueprints for expansion she couldn't keep up with. Caleb worked beside him, quieter since Ethan's release last week, his parole done, but his shadow long. Kessler had lost feds buried Ethan's case with the USPS evidence, but he walked on a technicality. A bribed clerk's signature scrubbed from the record. Hargrove had called, voice tight, "He's out, Maya. Watch your back." She nodded into the phone, the tamales steaming beside her, and hung up, the promise of Ethan's glare a weight she couldn't shake. He came that afternoon, a black SUV rolling up slow outside the center, its tinted windows swallowing the sun. Maya saw it from the rolls off the kitchen window, kids darting past as she wiped her hands, flour streaking her jeans. Ethan stepped out, his white suit crisp despite the dust, his blonde hair slicked back, a smirk curling his lips. Vince followed, scar glinting, fists flexing like he itched to use them. She stepped outside, the air cool, her breath fogging as she faced him, arms crossed, Rosa's necklace tucked under her shirt. "Nice place," Ethan drawled, eyes raking the brick. "Too bad it's built on my money." "It's jackass," she said, voice hard. "And it's staying." He laughed, sharp and cold. "You think you're safe? I'll burn this down your little charity, your kid brother, all of it." She stepped closer, nose an inch from his, fury a live wire in her chest. "Try it. They'd still have your name. One spark, and you're back inside." His smirk faltered, but he leaned in, breath sour. "You're dead, barmaid. Just wait." Caleb emerged from the garden, spade in hand, his dark eyes narrowing as he saw Ethan. "Back off," he said, low and steady, stepping beside her. Ethan's gaze flicked to him, venomous. "Traitor. You took her deal." Mom's rolling in her grave. Caleb's jaw tightened, knuckles white on the spade. "Mom's gone. This is mine now." Ethan sneered, but Vince shifted, uneasy, as kids peeked from the windows, Leo jogging up with a basketball under his arm, whistle bouncing. "Get out," Maya said, voice ablade. "You're done here." Ethan adjusted his cufflinks, slow and deliberate. "This ain't over." He climbed into the SUV, Vince trailing, and peeled off, tires spitting gravel. Maya exhaled, chest tight, and turned to Caleb. "I'll try something." He nodded, tossing the spade aside. "Let him. We'll stop him." Leo clapped her shoulder, grinning despite the tension. "He's all talk, chica. We got this." That night, she stayed late, the center quiet, the kitchen dark but for a single light. She cooked tacos al pastor, pineapple chard filling the air with heat and memory. Caleb joined her, silent, chopping onions with a precision she hadn't taught him. "He's mad," he said, knife pausing. "But he's scared too." She nodded, flipping a tortilla. "Good. Let him sweat." They ate together, Diego sketching at the table, Leo crashing on a couch in the gym. The fire Jack saw in her burned steady, unquenched, and she defied to keep it alive. Winter settled over Atlanta, a thin frost glazing the south side streets, the garden at Rosa's Haven bare, but for evergreen shrubs Caleb had planted. Maya stood on the rooftop, a flat stretch above the center, edged with a low wall, watching the city's neon pulse against a black sky. The air bit her cheeks, her breath curling in wisps, but she didn't mind. The center thrummed below, kids laughing in the gym, Leo's whistle sharp, the kitchen warm with the smell of tamales she'd left simmering. It was hers, this messy, loud, living thing, and Jack's shadows stretched long across it, his promise carved into every brick. Diego climbed up, his coat too big, his notebook tucked under his arm. "Cold," he said, soft, sitting beside her, his pencil tapping the page. She ruffled his hair, grinning as he ducked. "Yeah, worth it, though." He nodded, sketching a tower that spiraled into the stars. His quiet a comfort she'd never trade. Caleb followed, boots heavy on the stairs, his breath fogging as he leaned on the wall, hands in his pockets. "Ethan's gone quiet," he said, voice low. "Too quiet." She nodded, Rosa's necklace dangling from her fingers, the cross glinting. "He plotting. We'll be ready." Leo shouted from below, "Maya, food's burning." She laughed, sharp and free, and headed down, Caleb and Diego trailing. The kitchen was chaos, pot steaming, kids sneaking bites, Ruby visiting with a pan of cornbread, her hug warm and fierce. "Proud of you, sugar," she whispered, and Maya squeezed back, throat tight. They ate tacos, chili, Ruby's bread plates clattering, voices overlapping, Diego sketching between bites, Caleb quieter but there, his chair close to hers. After, she cleaned alone, the center settling into silence, the city's hum a distant pulse. She pulled Jack's letter from her pocket, its ink faded, and set it beside Rosa's necklace and a photo Ruby had found Jack and Rosa, young, smiling, before it all broke. She poured a bourbon shot, placing it by the frame, the amber catching the light. "Thanks, Jack," she whispered, voice soft. "We did it." The shot stayed untouched, a quiet toast to the man who dragged her in and set her free. Spring bloomed a year later, the south side alive with green, Rosa's haven a cornerstone, now brick walls weathered but proud, the garden a sprawl of roses and herbs, kids running paths Diego had mapped. Maya stood in the kitchen, her apron streaked with salsa, teaching a class 10 teens, hands clumsy but eager, rolling tamales under her eye. "Tighter," she said, grinning as one split, masa oozing. "You'll get it." They laughed, the room warm with chili and lime, her mom's recipes a thread through time. Diego ran the number 17 now, taller, his maps plans for a playground, a library more. Caleb managed the garden, his leather jacket hung up, his hands steady in the dirt, roses thriving under his care. Ethan had vanished, rumors said north, maybe Canada, his threats empty now, Kessler broke. Leo coached, his team winning games on a court he paved, his laugh a constant echo. Ruby visited weekly, her cornbread a ritual, her stories of Jack softer now, less bitter. Night fell, the center quiet, Maya on the roof again, the city's neon a familiar glow. She held the necklace, its cross warm from her skin, Jack's letter folded beside her. Diego joined, sketching stars, Caleb beside him, silent but solid. "It's good," Caleb said, rare and low, nodding at the garden below. She smiled soft. "Yeah, better than he hoped." They sat, the air sweet with spring, a family forged from lost Jack's fire, her fight, their future. Atlanta pulsed, relentless, but here, in this corner she'd built, it was hers, warm, alive. The war was over, and the legacy stretched on. Dear friend, my story today ends here. But I believe that its echo will last forever. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. This story is truly an epic full of emotions, captivating and cinematic, combining the rainy Atlanta street scene with the dark side of society and broken lives, but hidden in the hope of rebirth.